Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we have our guest, Stefan Wolpers, who is a professional Scrum Trainer and Agile expert. He's going to be sharing with us today a little bit about his background and his thoughts around the topic. Thank you so much for joining us, Stefan.
Thanks a lot for having me, Chris. It's a
Yeah,
pleasure.
of course. Of course. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're working on, and who makes a good client for you.
Well, I'm a trainer with Scrum.org, so I try to help people understand how to develop products in an agile way and using Scrum most of the time. Although I like to stress that we're not getting paid to practice Scrum, right? We're still getting paid to solve our customers' problems within the given constraints, ideally contributing to the bottom line of our organization. So that's basically what I do most of the time. And just published a book, so I write a lot, I read a lot, curate a newsletter. So that's how I spend my time.
Got it. For the layperson that may not be familiar with agile coaching, can you give us a quick explanation?
It's about how to overcome this idea that a lot of people have that they exactly know what their customers want and need.
Hmm.
So my experience, most of the time, this is simply not the case. So we have to figure out what is going on, what people need, and that takes some experimentation, some willingness to make mistakes, some willingness to accept failure as a part of the process, and I help people to get there as far as culture and mindset is concerned.
Got it. Um, and how much, I'm always curious about this when it comes to like coaching, especially where you have, there's somewhat of a playbook and there's a overarching like strategy and philosophy towards things.
Mhm.
But the trick is about adaptability and coming in, dealing with personalities essentially. Um, how do you go about that in terms of working with companies and not just bringing in the ideologies, but also like putting it into practice, where I can imagine sometimes your biggest hurdle is just um battling with the different personalities that's out there.
Oh, people are always a problem. I mean, it's the,
Fair enough.
the classic bomb from consulting, right?
Yeah.
Um, Well, there's always a reason why a culture is the way it is, why an organization is run the way it is. I mean, organizations are built to be resilient. They are supposed to be resilient in the sense that, okay, just because the road ahead it gets a bit bumpy, we're not want to be thrown off track. And of course, at the same time, if you want to become agile, if you want to embrace business agility, so learning faster than the competition and then being able to capitalize on your advanced knowledge, you have to figure out, okay, how do we help people understand that change sometimes is positive, it's a good thing, and that is the most prevailing issue that we have here, because I believe a lot of companies, a lot of organizations just simply fail to help people understand why change is necessary and what is in for them personally.
Hmm.
And if you start to looking at the problem from that perspective, it becomes, I wouldn't say easier, but it becomes more transparent. What the issues might be and how you may be able to tackle them.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Um, are there typical like industries or verticals where you're being called in where that I guess, like, what are the typical use cases of when you're being called in to help with an organization? What are they experiencing and in terms of like issues or inefficiencies that's glaring to the point where they know they need to bring in somebody like you?
Well, typically it's a question of size on the one side, and of course of certain industries on the other side. So finance, insurance certainly is an issue, but also utilities, for example. So traditional large organizations that are built around traditional ways of handling things, of managing things, of making money, are usually struggling a lot with the idea to become agile, because let's face it, you can't scale agile. This is a crazy idea. Um, Scaling agile in air quotes actually means that you have to descale the organization. You need to be willing to empower the people closest to the problem to come up with a solution within the existing guardrails that you set up as management or leadership. And it requires that you let go. It requires that you as a leader basically show the way and help people to be successful. And this is not how a lot of people in the job were trained in the past. If you were socialized in a professional way, in the sense that you are the go-to person to solve all the kind of problems of your reportees and the people that report to you. I mean, and now you're expected to tell them, okay, figure out the problem of how to solve the problem on your own. I will help you the best way I can, but you're closest to the problem. Yeah? It's very different. It's far exceeding what we would believe to be some sort of mindset change, sort of adapting a new way of thinking or something like that. A lot of
Hmm.
people struggle with that.
Yeah. And you mentioned too, like, I mean, agile at scale, like it doesn't, it's not necessarily, it's work in that sense of things, but you're saying bringing in the right leaders from an organization to be a part of that process. Um, and then, you know, learning from in those iterations and letting go to a certain point. And then at how do you, I mean, I feel like as companies, I mean, part of it is like as companies grow, there's also companies that start off maybe super agile, and then
Mm,
as they grow, it becomes less and less because processes go into place, and
mm.
it's not they're not doing it on a as regular basis. Do you ever run into those instances where they started off in that way and that way of mindset or thinking, and instituting that, and then somehow lost it as they scaled up and as a company?
Oh, all the time. So
Yeah,
it's a typical fate for a lot of startups. At
yeah.
the beginning, you're a small, dedicated group of people who are purpose driven, right? And then you basically you hit product market fit. You start to scale, so your product gets traction, and you get more funding. You need more people, and this is the moment when very often culture starts to shift because now your VCs probably start suggesting, "Hey, come on, you need to bring in more mature people, people with the appropriate background in scaling organizations who have done this at other companies. And by the way, we happen to know a few people who do this." And then you basically start importing a mindset that is very different from the one that you started with.
Hmm.
And very often, organizations don't survive this because the people who started the company, who did all the hard work at the beginning, maybe they're not best suited to actually grow the business and scale it into a large organization. But by all means, they get tired and they will start to move away, voluntarily or involuntarily, one
Yeah.
way or another. It always happens. And then you end up with your standard organization that maybe still be technological, very, very adapted and leading the market, but it's slowly but steadily succumbing to bureaucracy and more corporate thinking. And it
Hmm.
takes some very, very skilled people, think of the Stripe founders to preserve the original spirit and keep the company alive, even though you're becoming successful and you're growing.
Yeah. Um, I had a question on like how much like external economic, environmental factors impact sometimes those decisions, right? So, for example, I'm thinking like things like the pandemic or things like interest rates going up and companies forced to go more lean or uh, different priorities start coming up that drastically shift
Mm.
their viewpoints on certain things. Um, do you run into instances where like those become catalysts for thinking more in under the agile way methodologies?
That's an interesting question. So what I have encountered in the past is that a lot of consultancies typically sell agile transformations to a lot
Mm,
of organizations in the sense that, well, actually, you're descaling your organization. There will be less levels of hierarchy, and it actually pays for itself.
mm,
Because a lot of well-paid people will become redundant, and everything will be just fine. And today, 2 years down the road, it will be a win-win for everyone, which typically not does not happen in that way. So that's maybe one of the ideas that a lot of people at the C-level may have why becoming agile is a good idea. What we can observe at the moment, given the uncertainty in the business, is that a lot of companies are actually starting to scale down the agile operations. So
interesting.
there are a lot of Scrum Masters and Agile coaches who are looking for new opportunities
Mhm,
and who struggle to actually explain how they're contributing to the overall success of the organization. Now, the problem is that the cost center is obvious. You mean people get salaries and you have to pay their invoices. But on the other side, on the upside, it's very hard to identify how they are positively influencing the way that the organization operates. What happens if you take them away?
mm,
Will you immediately see that revenue is dropping, costs are increasing, headcount turnover starts to increase, or what? So it's very hard to identify and to put a number on the positive aspects of the work of these people.
mhm,
And this is really catching up to them at the moment. So a
interesting.
lot of companies are hitting the brakes as far as
Got it.
that is concerned.
Got it. I mean, as part of your narrative and how you work with these types of companies, is there a certain spin that you put on it? And I'll bring this up because this maybe is a good example that's analogous to this, which is I was talking to like a data science expert, um, and and that competitive with AI and things like that, and so um, just speaking with him around the topic of data, he is saying like that. Well, I guess like similar to, to Scrum leaders, like you need to make a business use case or business case around it. And so he was saying that, uh, if you don't address these certain things, these things will happen. And so he has to plug into realizing tangible results, leveraging data, not from what he would like to ideally do, but
Mm,
from like a business economic standpoint, so they can
mm,
get mini wins from an organization to prove out the ROI of what data can do for them
mm,
before they can then do maybe like the more, what would traditionally be like the research type of like data experiments where you don't know necessarily what the outcome of that is going to help benefit yet, but you know that that's important to learn. But in order for them to get to that point, they have to like make those business use cases. I'm
mm.
curious if you're seeing a shift in that, or if you've noticed that already, and you're seeing Scrum trainers and leaders start figuring out what that narrative or story is.
Yeah, the idea to create a business case for your role is, I think, becoming more pressing.
Hmm.
Because up to now, a lot of people just had this idea that, well, we're practicing Scrum, and well, look at the manual. It says a Scrum team has a Scrum Master. A lot of organizations, okay, so we hire some Scrum Masters here, right? But nowadays, people start, wait a minute, what are you actually doing here all day? So I just recently ran a survey to asking people, okay, what are you doing all day, dear Scrum Master, when I have only one team? And so I still have to need to have a closer look at the data. But last time I ran this survey, so it was something around the vicinity. Well, the usual stuff that I do as far as events are concerned or helping people. Well, it's maybe 15 hours a week. And the rest of the time I basically invest in figuring out how to become better at what we do here.
Hmm.
And of course, a lot of people saying, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So should you support three teams? So or why do we have this? Do we need this in the first place? Maybe if the teams are self-managing, and listen, you always tell me this is this is the case why we actually want to become agile, self-managing teams that solve customer problems on their own. Then why not pool the Scrum Masters and say, okay, the teams, if you have a problem here, we have a pool of 3 Scrum Masters, please ask them.
Hmm.
And so there's we definitely see some shift here in
Yeah.
the understanding whether these positions are necessary or not.
Yeah.
And this is overlapping with so the pendulum is swinging back. There are still some skeptical voices on the side of the developers. So why do we need all this stuff?
Yeah.
I hate doing these daily scrums, and please go away with your white elephant relative ranking, whatever you do here. We don't need this. Just let me do my work and I'm fine. And so it's really a difficult moment.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting, just to close the thought, is no one thought of that before. 2022 heyday. Full employment. Uh, good, well-paid jobs, and if you were a Scrum Master 2 years ago, you basically could choose your job, right?
Mm.
Nowadays, it's very different.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder well, before I do that, before I ask that question, I wanted to ask real quick. I mean, well, not ask, but point out, I guess, I mean, the tricky part to make that business use case, right, is like you have to be able to somewhat predict the futures. Like, what would the opportunity of
Mm,
cost have been if we had gone down this route versus doing
mm,
it this agile function, right? And being able to compare them right side by side ultimately, which is obviously you're choosing one way versus the other, so it's very
mm,
difficult to prove that out. Um, but to my second question, which is around um, what do you think has shifted and changed in the past year and a half or 2 years, where the Scrum Masters are drastically shifting to the other side of this pendulum, as you alluded to, where it is becoming more difficult? Is it because purse strings within organizations becoming tighter? Again, maybe going back to some of those like macroeconomic shifts that might be impacting the way people think about it.
oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So money is becoming a sensitive issues. I mean, interest rates have risen significantly. Refinancing has become significantly more expensive, and this has a cooling effect, of course, on the economy. And the effect is immediately felt.
Mm-hmm.
So people start going through budgets and thinking about, okay, where do we have some fat in the organization that we can actually remove? What is really necessary, and what was nice to have 2 years ago when we were able to afford this, because, well, it was huge, just part of our game in the war for talent part. So I mean, people expected you to provide good training classes to them on an annual basis, and you got the hiring bonuses, and of course there were sufficient people that would be able to work in jobs where no one knew exactly what the use case was. So the immediate use case, right? So there was some sort of understanding at an intellectual level. Yeah, I understand this is a principle. Yeah, makes sense. But no one could put some numbers to this.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's the necessity to do that, and it is very difficult.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, where do you think, I know you're saying now it's a challenging time for Scrum Masters. Um, where do you where do you think that this market is gonna is shifting towards over the next like year or 2 years? Do you think this is gonna be a continued situation where it's gonna be a tough market for Scrum Masters? And then um the follow-up to that would be, what other career paths are they considering based on
Mm.
they have this certain skill set? Like how are they translating that into, some other shape or form?
Well, first of all, I think it's going to have a cleansing effect in the sense that the chaff will be separated from the wheat.
Mm,
So high demand for these kind of jobs or for these kind of Scrum Masters, Agile coaches also meant that a lot of people started working in these areas that had little professional knowledge. I
yeah.
mean, as I spent before I started doing this, I spent over a decade, 1.5 decades in developing products, your hard and software. That was my trade.
Yeah.
And then I started to think about, okay, how can we improve on actually doing that? And nowadays you have people that are getting right out of college and make a certification or two and then start
Mm,
working as a Scrum Master. And you see people looking for a junior Scrum Master. They all think, my God, this is an oxymoron. Scrum Master is actually some sort of leadership position, and it has a touch of senior leadership position because you have to juggle with so many things. You have to understand the business model, the market. You have to understand people,
yep.
politics, hierarchy. There's everything involved. And how can you do this if you're 22-year-old kid? I mean, you have no chance to actually survive in that area unless it's fair weather sailing, right? And that has stopped last year.
Yeah.
So it's the waters are getting choppy, really choppy.
Mm,
I think a lot of the newcomers will have to reconsider whether this is a good choice from a professional perspective in the long run.
mhm.
On the other side, if you are good at what you're doing now, there shouldn't be much of a problem finding some other areas where you could apply your knowledge. Because in the end, it's all about communication, helping people to collaborate, helping facilitating decision making, helping people to align, that maybe have different intentions and different incentives to actually move in the same direction for the purpose for a greater good, for example, the organization's well-being. So I'm quite optimistic about that. The knowledge is valuable. The question is of whether you will apply that knowledge with a business card saying I'm a Scrum Master or an Agile Coach. You know, I don't know where that is going. Seriously, what I
Yeah.
believe might be the next step is something. Let's move beyond Scrum.
Mm,
Um, as I mentioned earlier, we don't get paid to practice Scrum. Our job is to solve customer problems within the given constraints while contributing to the bottom line of our organization. And honestly, no one cares whether we use Scrum or whatever we use, as long as we deliver an outcome in an ethical and financially sound way that is legal and that is um, aligned with governance rules. Let me put it this way.
yeah.
So I mean, if my car has a problem, I bring it to the shop. I don't ask the mechanic what kind of tools they're using. I expect them to be professional and to fix the problem, and I pay the invoice, and then I'm happy that they fixed my car.
Yep.
And why would our job here be different?
Yep. Yep. Fair enough. Um, I just want to kind of touch upon your history and your background too. It's you mentioned you spent better part of a decade plus in product development and developing products, and you have the real world experience of it. Um, can you walk us through just a little bit around, at what point you were into your career where you're that, I guess, like that itch scratched you where there's got to be a better way and for us to be deploying at in a more efficient manner, and made a decision to really kind of make that now into your profession. But like, what drew that in for you? Because there's a lot, as you mentioned, there's a lot of developers out there that just let me just do my job, right? And they
Mm.
don't try to overly think about the process or all those other things.
Well, it was actually a funny thing. So at the time, I was working for a startup, more kind of, the operational guy, helping the founder find the way, doing everything from talking to the VCs and organizing the stuff to helping run the daily business. It was a small startup, and the developers asked me whether I would be willing to help them too, become the Scrum Master. I had no idea what Scrum was about, and I thought, okay, how hard can this be? And so uh, um, if you want, Scrum found me, and it was. I never knew this at the beginning. I had no clue that we were practicing Scrum in the mixture with extreme programming at the time, and I just thought, okay, this would be the way how to develop software. And I thought,
Mm,
hey, this makes a lot of sense, you know. So yeah, it appeals to me, and I continued doing that. And then there was the moment when I found out, it has a name, you know. And then I started to dig a bit deeper into that, and I've been doing that ever since. So that's almost 20 years now.
mm,
So it was a fun time, and I think I covered a lot of roles. So from product owner slash product manager on the one side to Scrum Master, Agile Coach on the other side. So I think I have a pretty good perspective on both sides of the equation, and it's
interesting.
always been a fun part.
Yeah. Last question here as we're up on time is just we saw uh we saw ChatGPT come out with the GPT 4.0, and I'm curious
Mhm.
as your thoughts on it. I don't know if you saw some of those videos around, learning, helping to learn and teach and things like that. Um, Obviously, AI is here; it's gonna stick around. Whether there's immediate practicality functions, I think there's still going to be a learning curve, obviously. But are you thinking about any of that as it relates back to your role and what you do, and how it might affect like Scrum training or how things are, you know, uh, rolled out in the future?
All the time.
Yeah,
So I started digging into ChatGPT early last year,
yeah,
and really applying it to the typical scenario. So, for example, I have a set of interview questions to get a better understanding of the applicant's know-how and standing, you know, before you start hiring them.
mm,
And so I ran these questions with ChatGPT, and I was quite surprised because the answers were not bad. You know,
mm-hmm,
so said, okay, you're not perfect, but they would have made it beyond the threshold of okay, I give them a second interview round, you know, because I like to learn more about them. And I thought to myself, my goodness, this is really not bad. You know, given that it's not a specific LLM, it's not trained on a specific set of data, it's just generalized. And so I took it further, and I really continued working with this, and I consider it to be an excellent sparring partner for a lot of things. You know,
mm,
creating workshops, helping people with working agreements, and get a draft for your definition of done. Support your stakeholders, understanding what is going on here. You know, it can help you in so many ways, provided you know what you're doing.
mm-hmm,
So it will help the people who are knowledgeable already,
yeah,
and who can understand how to value the outcome of their sessions. It will be hard for people who have little or just superficial knowledge of the idea, because they might take a lot of things for granted that the LMM comes up with. So that is, it's not necessarily the classic obvious hallucination. It's more the little details, you know, where it's somehow not really round. You know, something is missing, and
mm-hmm, yeah, I get it.
so you know, it's a bit challenging what they answer you, and they probably might not see this. You know,
Yeah,
so I'm really excited about this. I'm really looking forward to what is going to be next. So, I mean, in the States, you're privileged in Europe due to the data
yeah,
protection,
different.
whatever
Yeah,
regulation. We're also limping a bit behind.
yeah,
But I'm really looking forward to the new stuff. You know, so that'll be
absolutely.
fun.
Very cool. On that note, Stefan, thank you so much for taking the time today, sharing your nuggets and your experience. Super valuable, very insightful. So just want to say thanks.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
And apologies for my camera.
no, no problem.